It's time for the Manufacturing Austin podcast, sponsored by Texas Mutual.
Welcome. My name is Ed Latson, and this is the Manufacturing Austin podcast, sponsored by Texas Mutual. Today, our guest is Mark Pollard, Chief Operating Officer for Astute Electronics, a company that's on the forefront of the semiconductor shortage. And while we're definitely going to talk about semiconductors today, I wanted to start by announcing that Mark is also the captain of two former championship ARMA golf tournament teams. And Mark, maybe that's a great place to start. Tell us, what does it take to be a winner?
Bringing in the ringers and having a lot of fun. I apologize. I should have thought of this. I need my trophies on the trophy case, but we're so proud of them that we actually display them at our main entry into the building. So,
well, what I've actually heard is that you're the ringer on the team, Mark. I know you talk about bringing them in, but I hear you're the guy.
No, it's a team effort. It's a team effort. It's always the least expected person who sinks the putt, that changes the momentum, and then then we're off to the races.
It's been a good run. And speaking of good run, you've had a good run at Astute. I mean, you've been COO now for 3 years. I know early on in your tenure, you moved the U.S. headquarters from Virginia to Austin. Talk about that experience and where you are now in your business.
Yeah, we made a strategic decision early on. I came on, obviously being the only person in Austin at the time I joined. Our whole team was in Virginia, evaluating that team and putting together kind of our 5-year plan. It was pretty clear to me that for us to scale, acquire the talent, be near our business partners, and just some geographical advantages, that it made a lot of sense for us to move that business that had set up shop in 2007 in Virginia and done a really good job for many, many years. But I came on to take the company to a different level and do things differently. And the move has been, proven to be advantageous for us.
So Mark, Astute's a pretty unique business. Why don't you tell us about what you guys do?
Yeah, we are a unique business, and in most markets, we kind of fly under the radar a little bit, but Astute supports its customers in 3 main areas. Supply chain services, we support them on shortages, which is obviously very relevant right now, leveraging our global sourcing teams. We support them on obsolescence, components they can't get through normal distribution channels or direct with the manufacturer. And then also cost savings, where we support them on reducing their standard purchasing price. Secondly, franchise distribution services, where we represent a few dozen manufacturers from the design level all the way through fulfillment. And third, inventory solutions, where we support customers on last time buys, inventory storage, vendor management, vendor consolidation. And then on the back end of that is asset recovery, where we take surplus or excess and try to recover cash from their excess inventory.
Yeah, we have a ton of electronic manufacturers in Austin area. They're all really looking for parts. The shortage is causing a lot of problems. How is what's happening in the supply chain semiconductor business impacted Astute?
It's impacted us significantly. We had, customers that weren't really operating, or they had orders canceled last year during the COVID, during the pandemic, which is still not over, but manufacturing and the economy has largely come back online. How it's affected us is we've seen a 4x increase in our business in the last 4 months or so. We started to see it late last year. We saw signs. We had backlog business that was starting to be pulled in, and we were noticing lead times were starting to go out. It was interesting, and then there were some price increase announcements there at the end of the year. But things really started to take off. Ironically, pretty much right after the winter apocalypse. We thought, between the pandemic, the winter storm, it's like, man, we had an ERP glitch where our system was down for a few days. Right around that time, we're like, this can't get any worse for our business. And then really it was like just sort of accelerant on fire. Customers across the board, from high reliability mil aero to energy and industrial to consumer, just came out of the woodwork.
Are you seeing an increase in counterfeits now that there's such a shortage?
We are not. We know the channels. Astute's been in business 32 years. That's a big part of our value add beyond what we do in our labs, X-ray analysis. We what's called decapsulate or delid parts, semiconductors, where we verify the die inside, which is highly proprietary and can't be easily replicated or duplicated. We're not seeing it just yet because we know the channels to avoid. We have procurement teams all throughout Asia, Europe, and North America to protect us from that. However, highly expect and anticipate more and more counterfeits, clones, refurbished parts to continue hitting the market. Bad actors, where there's massive demand and limited supply are gonna make a quick buck like they would in any industry. So I fully expect to start seeing possibly some refurbished parts. The counterfeiters, cloners are getting very sophisticated. Every few years they kind of keep up. But luckily they're behind the curve, but they're more and more sophisticated these days. But you also have inexperienced buyers at massive companies. You've got engineers who say, oh, my procurement team can't find this part. Let me go Google it and I'll go find it. And I can't tell you how dangerous that is for someone that doesn't have an established supply chain, know the markets, or have a partner that can sort of guide them through there to go and just source a highly allocated semiconductor or any type of electronic component out there just on the open web. So we haven't seen it, Ed. I do have concerns. Our customers rely on us to go into markets we may not want to, and we sort of take that risk with them. They know we've got the back end to catch that with all the inspection and the testing that we do. We take that risk for them. We communicate up front. But I expect here over the next few months, as inventory continues, there's just too little inventory out there where the bad actors are gonna allow product into the market. Distributors or OEMs, procurement teams are gonna go buy that product, and it's just gonna happen.
So if you had to give a tip to maybe a buyer at a small company, looking for supply but uncertain, what would that tip be?
Well, I can't blame someone for trying to solve a problem. And if they haven't had the problem before, and even buyers at big companies that have never been through this cycle don't quite understand what that risk is. I would give them, obviously we're happy to help them. They may not know who we are, but I would verify some basic things about who you're doing business with. Ask for photos of the product, labels in particular. The parts may not be counterfeit, they may be mislabeled or misrepresented in a way. Never pay in advance for product, really, from anyone, unless it's someone you know and you agree to those terms for one reason or the other, because there's a chance you may not get anything at all. There's bad actors out there basically committing, financial fraud, saying, hey, I can get you this, wire me the funds, and I'll send you these, 20,000 units of this NXP chip. So there's ways to mitigate it. Photos of the product that you're buying. Ask for trade references from your vendors. Who are your other customers? Will they say that you're reputable? Don't pay in advance. And ideally have someone and have a robust, hopefully operations and quality department that provides the procurement team's best practices and stick to that. There's a saying in our industry of the sweet feel or taste of low cost is quickly forgotten by the cost of poor quality, right? Everyone likes to find a savings deal, but even saving, if you save 10% on something and you risk poor quality can mean millions. Where a 10% discount on a component that maybe you're spending $5,000 on, or even $500 on, if that goes out in the field, your cost, your exposure, your liability is some exponential factor so much higher. So we don't purport to be the low cost solution in all cases, particularly in shortage. But what our customers get is quality. They get confidence and peace of mind, and they ultimately get the products that they need to continue their production lines.
You talked a couple of times about the cycle in semiconductor industry.
Mhm.
We've had all these disruptions with COVID and the Great Freeze. You name it, it's happened this year. Let's take those things out of the equation. Would we still be seeing shortages right now if it weren't for those issues?
We would. I think we would right now for a few reasons. There's disruptive technology that's just coming online. Electric vehicles is hitting critical mass popularity in major markets. 5G is still trying to come online, and so there's been a lot of development um, pulling demand, and that's high volume demand from the Huawei's and the Ericssons and the Nokias of the world. You factor that also with mergers and acquisitions in the semiconductor world. These big players have been acquiring the smaller ones year after year for the last 15, 20 years now. So whereas before these manufacturers had 3 or 4 different options, they have one now. I mean, you have Intel has acquired Altera. You have what was once Spansion, AMD Spansion to Cypress, now Infineon. So Infineon's kind of that big fish. You see it with Analog Devices acquiring Linear Tech and Maxim. Most customers used to have Linear Tech, Maxim, TI, Analog Devices, 4 to 5 sometimes options. So it's almost like having more options at the grocery store. You go buy something, if one's out of stock or doesn't look as good that day, you've got other options here. This is a matter in some cases of only having one option. So that's sort of a third factor in that as well. So disruptive technology that would have led to shortages anyway, pandemic driven circumstances, and this M&A, just sort of this natural progression of the semiconductor market where the bigger players are eating up the smaller ones.
Well, I think that consolidation in the industry really points to something I wanted to bring up with you. There's a couple of dynamics at play, especially in the semiconductor market. You have this global trade conflicts that we experienced the past 4 years in the prior administration. And then, COVID really exposed the fact that we're vulnerable to, foreign suppliers in a variety of products, whether it be PPE or semiconductors. We're starting to see the U.S. government respond. I was really encouraged to see the Senate come up with a bipartisan bill. We have the American for Innovation and Competitiveness Act. It sets aside $200 billion for advanced technologies and manufacturing, $50 billion of which would go to semiconductors.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I'm curious about, to hear your take, is is this a response to us shoring up strategic needs in this country? Or is this more of an escalation in a trade war with, say, China?
It's both. It's absolutely both. The United States in recent history, when we have a singular foe, things happen, and China is clearly that foe for us, even though they're a great trade partner and have kind of beaten us at our own game, in some instances, and maybe not played fair in other instances, but it's very much both. I think a unified foe gets our federal government to act quickly, which we saw with the bipartisan support, and we are at risk. Where we are producing somewhere along 12% of the world's semiconductors, even though some estimates have us 50% of the world's demand. That's quite a bit out of balance. So, I don't think the United States ever wants to be in a position where they're dependent on any foreign entity, much less one that we view as a foe for a variety of reasons. I think when you start discussing applications like national security, the networks that our federal government works on, satellites that provide surveillance to our military, advantages we want to have in advanced weaponry, warfighting equipment, those types of things, you suddenly realize, wow, we are really at risk, and we don't have several layers of the supply chain upstream, from the rare earth to the silicon at the foundries to the semiconductor production right now. So I would say that again, it's very much both. It's helpful for us politically to say, hey, there's a foe, and so we're going to act. American people get behind that. Politicians obviously get behind that. They're all trying to get reelected, but there's a real concern and a real risk, and I'm really encouraged that the government's acting so swiftly.
Yeah, I'm encouraged as well, and I think there's a dynamic at play that a lot of people don't understand with offshoring. There was a big push, obviously, in the 90s. We let a lot of the lower tech manufacturing go abroad, and we anticipated that the engineering and the innovation would stay here. But as the manufacturing skills have improved overseas, what you see is that the innovation and the product know-how is really overseas as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're seeding whole industries. So I think this investment is really critical to the success of our country.
I agree.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens. How do you think it's going to impact Austin?
I think Austin's been an attractive place since the late 90s, when a lot of the California tech companies came out here to have a second campus or relocate, which we're still seeing now to this day. I think Texas being business friendly. I think the great universities that we have around here, the space that we have to grow is going to attract hopefully large companies expanding, large companies that aren't here yet come in. Medium-sized companies having the ability to grow and hopefully identify some incredible technology that they can really scale up and grow and take to market, and the small guys, having the resources to go and really do what we did well for many years in the 80s and 90s, and really being leaders globally. In research, development, and innovation for semiconductors. So I think Austin's in a great place to benefit, and I hope that with the dollars, the job market that's already strained, that may alleviate some of the pressures as far as paying market value for these trained engineers, and getting the brightest young minds and of any age in the lab working on these challenges, and we come out of it 4, 6, 10 years later, and we're back in a position. Maybe we're not producing 40%, but we're back up to 20 or 25%, and that might be a comfortable number where we're self-sufficient. We've got allies doing what we're doing, and we've got enough where the threat, at least the China threat, isn't so overwhelming.
Well, Mark, I think that kind of brings us full circle. I'm really happy that you moved Astute Electronics here to Austin.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's so much opportunity here. It's going to be fun to watch you guys grow. It's going to be fun to see what happens, in this country with this semiconductor opportunity. And certainly ARMA's going to do what we can to move the ball down the field. And in the meantime, let's keep the conversation going. So I thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. It's great speaking with you, and I love talking about this topic.
This is the Manufacturing Austin podcast, sponsored by Texas Mutual.